was with the loss. Okay, sorry, got it. Okay. I was with the loss program last year during my first year of internship with my MSW program. And so I had the good fortune to be with a 8-week group, and I led an 8-week mindfulness group and saw clients. And so I just had just such a really just a special year with so many of the lost members. So it just feels good to be back and to see familiar faces and names. Yeah, so I just wanted to first acknowledge that. For those of you who maybe were here for last year's presentation, and then if in the 8-week mindfulness group, some of this might be familiar. However, what I have found is that even for someone who studies and is interested in trauma and mindfulness and the nervous system and grief and all of it, I find that even though I hear things or the material is presented, I still often will learn something either about the material or about myself. So if a slide comes up and you're like, oh, I saw that already, maybe it will feel a little bit different or offer a little more insight into your experience. And the other piece is that we're always changing and we're always evolving, and our lives are, we're in different stages of our life. And one of the other things is that while this is about grief and trauma and the nervous system, all of this can be applied to just our current situation with the pandemic and COVID and what's happening. So regardless of where you are in your grief process, a lot of this is just applicable to like right here in the moment, present day, that I hope is really helpful to all of you. And like Emily said, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at any point, and I'll do my best to get to all of them. We'll have a couple of chances just to ask questions in the group setting, which I just encourage you to ask, because if I'm always confident that if one person has the question, many other people have the question, so you're asking it on behalf of the group. So it's an act of generosity when you ask questions. So the title of today, and I'm going to work with a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm going to wait for just a couple of moments. So today's presentation is trauma and grief, and it's called mindfulness. However, as I was reorganizing and recreating some slides, I thought, you know what, it's actually with a mindfulness perspective. And so I've shifted it because I think, mindfulness gets thrown around like all the time in today's kind of like culture, is just be mindful, or 10 steps to mindfulness, or do these 3 things and be mindful. And I think even for myself, someone who has been practicing mindfulness for close to 20 years, is that I even got caught up in what the image of what I thought someone was mindful looking, right? That they were, and I actually, I'll put my slides up, but they were perfectly quiet, perfectly still, perfectly peaceful. And then I would compare my image, the image of what I thought, and then I would compare it to what was going on in the inside of me, like my really down on the ground human experience. And I would think that I was always falling short of being mindful. So the reason that I use and added the word perspective was because it gives us a lot of space to be human, and in our human experience, the messiness of life, the suffering of life, and also the contradictions and the gray area. So anyway, I just wanted to start with that, and I'm going to start the PowerPoint presentation, which, like I said to Emily, is always a little nerve-wracking, but we're gonna see it here. Okay. Okay. Emily, am I good? Okay, thank you. Okay. So I had this, and from I couldn't not put this in, but this is kind of the way I thought of, like, when we think of mindfulness, people looking, let's see if my uh fancy, okay, yeah. So, is that these are the images, and yet people are sitting so quietly, and yet they are thinking and wondering these different things. Why my mind, why my won't my mind stop thinking, why is my body hurting? And I thought this was supposed to be peaceful. So this image is really just to add a little bit of lightness to the word mindfulness, because I think, let me just grab my computer cord. um, I think that we can get so rigid around that word and then feel like we're coming up short. So I just wanted to offer just some recognition and some space for your humanness, to be, to accompany the mindfulness perspective. So during today, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna integrate what I call mini practices, instead of just having like one long, real long mindfulness practice. So throughout, periodically, we'll pause and stop. So the first practice, before we get on to some of the more kind of the science based about grief and trauma and the nervous system. And something that can be really, really helpful and super simple is something called grounding and orienting. And I actually remember last year, in two instances, really being reminded of this in hearing survivor stories, when a mother who had lost her son was at a grocery store, and all of a sudden, like, all the lights were like the lights were super bright, the sound started becoming really loud, and feeling really disoriented. And then another father was at a football game, and the sounds and the energy of being around everything just became so much louder and intensified. Like, where am I in time and space? So this is a very, very simple and helpful. And simple, I don't mean is like elementary or not potent, because simple can actually in many times be more effective than what we call, with more bells and whistles. So this is called grounding and orienting. And again, all you do, and you can do this here with me, is just notice three things that you can see. So, whether it's a picture or a light, a glass of water, if you have pillows around you, just anything that you see. And then two things that you can touch. So, or your feel, like if your feet are on the floor, if you have a blanket nearby, or even a piece of paper. And then one thing you can smell, right? So this just naturally connects you to the breath. Okay, I can feel my breath. And so what this does is it orients you back into this time and place. And it helps to ground you and connect you to your body and your physical environment. Often when we get triggered or overwhelmed, we don't have a sense of necessarily where we are. And so this is just, again, a practice that you can use. You can do it while you're in the car. Nobody knows you're doing it. So that's another thing. You could be at a meeting. I mean, now we're not really meeting, in groups of people, but you're on Zoom, you can apply something like that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move to the next slide. Okay. So we're starting with the nervous system. And the reason we're starting with the nervous system, and I don't mean to be like super sciencey, I'm definitely not a science person. However, the nervous system is the control center, and it basically is it's the system that the body responds and interprets life experiences. So this is super, super important, because when something happens, anything, the body is interpreting it through the nervous system. Okay. So when we think just about some basic images before we get to the more into trauma, when we just think about basic images, I'm going to show some images, and I just want you to pay attention just to the natural response in the body, right? So you might notice like, like a little flutter in the heart, or you might notice a tightness in the body, or you might, have a thought that comes to mind. So I just want you to pay attention to the way that your body responds to these images. And what I'm pointing to is that what I'm pointing to is the nervous system, because sometimes we can see like nervous system, what does that actually mean, my nervous system? So these images will hopefully help you just to associate or connect with it. All right, here we go. Okay. So I just want to open up the chat. Emily, can you see the chat? Is that okay? Because I can't see the chat. So I just wanted to check in and just see if there are any responses to how the pictures, how maybe a couple of the pictures felt as you saw some of the images, or did you notice a difference between one image versus another image? So just if a couple people wouldn't mind sharing, just so that I know you're out there and I'm not looking at a computer screen. Okay.
Yeah, we have a comment about how fireworks can be triggering to people who are veterans.
Yeah.
Like loud noises, or even being just like in a party or a club, like a loud environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's absolutely right. And so this is something really important, is that what triggers one person, right, may feel very different to another person. So someone going to see fireworks could remind them of July 4th with their family, and there's a positive experience. And I think it's Alicia is absolutely right? That depending on the background and depending on your experiences, the loud noises, and maybe not having a good experience on July 4th could trigger something else. So yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, and she just followed up talking about flashbacks, about being in combat, and also just like the hypervigilance, which I know is probably talked about even more in this presentation. Someone else said that the flowers in the sunset seemed calming. Someone said that the fire felt intense. The puppy seemed to make me relax. So did the sunset. Some of the images were peaceful, like the flowers, the puppy, the sun setting, but not peaceful, like the firemen. This person liked the puppy. It was very cute. I also liked the puppy.
Yes.
Puppies made me smile, and the fireman made me anxious.
Right. So this is one of the things that I want to point to. And again, mindfulness perspective, and super simple, but also super effective, is where do we turn our attention to? Okay. So it is very easy. And, our brains, our biology is is designed for a negativity bias. So we're designed to see, because we come from hunter gatherers, we're designed to see what is wrong and if we're safe or not. Okay. So we're always scanning, even if we don't realize it, we're always scanning for what could possibly or potentially go wrong. So just something as simple as where we're directing our attention. So that might be the sky. It might be a flower. It might be our dog. It might be, it might be the ocean if we were close to an ocean, right? But where are we putting our attention, and can we allow that feeling, even though we're holding something difficult? Because this is another piece, is that we learn to hold both, right? We learn to hold the difficult, we learn to hold the sadness, the grief, the anger. And how can we start, depending on where we are, how can we begin to hold maybe just a drop of gratitude, a drop of joy, a drop of peace? And can we begin to hold, can we start or even remain open to holding both, and drawing our attention to the places that cultivate those experiences? Okay. Are we good? Okay. All right. Is there a question? Anyone? Okay. Yes, Alicia, we're going to get there. Okay. All right. Okay. So next, what I'd like to talk about is, and I actually shouldn't, I should rename the slide that says a healthy nervous system, because it's just a nervous system. And that is, our nervous system moves in this kind of like wave-like, and we move from sympathetic activation, arousal, and then we kind of move into this parasympathetic, and we move in this like what's considered this window, and we move to basically orient to life, right? So if we go back to the first slide, which is our body is interpreting the life experiences around us, and our physiology, so our biology, our physiology, we're hardwired for our body to respond one way or another, as we saw in those photos. We're constantly moving through this flow. Okay, so all of us constantly moving through this flow between sympathetic and parasympathetic, and I'm going to go into the details in a second about that. Okay, so where do we go? Hold on one second. Okay, so take a moment, and you're welcome to read the slides if you'd like, but what I would recommend, if you're open to it, is just kind of close your eyes, okay, and sit back and just let me read this to you, just some different symptoms of being in either the sympathetic or parasympathetic. And the reason that I'm offering and inviting you to kind of bring the attention inward is because to allow the body to respond, rather than the mind trying to tell the body what the body is experiencing. Okay, so it's just a little bit of a different way to orient to what your experience is. So, and if you want, and you're of course welcome to read along. So in the sympathetic state, or the hyper aroused, there's often an oversensitization to sensations or sounds, hypervigilance to surroundings, high emotional reactivity. Thoughts or cognitive processing tends to be disorganized and in disarray. Intrusive imagery, too much stimulation, and difficult to pay attention. Okay. When we're in the hypo aroused, so when we're kind of in the down or the low part of the wave, there's usually an absence of sensation or apathy. Thoughts become disabled. It's hard to think clearly, maybe feeling spacey, removed, unable to concentrate. There's a numbing of emotions and reduced physical movement. Okay. So, and this is a super important point here, and we're going to talk about it a little bit in a couple of slides, but I just want to bring it up here just so that I make sure not to forget. But one reason that trauma survivors have a difficulty functioning in daily lives, especially in those immediate weeks and months is because part of the brain shuts off in order to survive, in order to manage all that has just happened. So we become disorganized and the cognitive processing becomes disabled, making everyday simple tasks such as planning, decision making, and organizing really difficult. So when there's a dysregulation, which I'll talk about in a slide or two, it's very difficult for the brain to restore order. Okay. And like I said here, we often get stuck in one of those zones. So what I'd like just to offer, just, mostly for your own connection to yourself, but also for the connection of the community, is just to put in the chat, or you can, if you'd like to share, I'll stop the share. Hold on one second here. All right. Is where do you notice that you live in your nervous system? So where do you notice that you spend time? So like, is it a symptom like hypervigilance or lethargy, or you can't, it's difficult to think, or hyperactivity? So if anyone wants to put in the chat or come on to the group.
I know Alicia put stomach, and I relate to that greatly.
Yeah. Oh, and here, very forgetful. Yes, Marina. Foggy brain. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the reasons, hypervigilance, yeah. Cup is always full. The least little thing becomes overwhelming. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I'm bringing this into the conversation or into the foreground is to normalize it, and to normalize it from a physiological response, right? There's a physiological natural response that the body is responding to a trauma, and trying to make sense of what has just happened. And one of the pieces that is, I think, like really, and one of the important takeaways is when we think about grief and trauma, traumatic grief and trauma, is that we have the loss, right? The grief of the person being gone. But then we also have the trauma, the physiological response around the disorganization around what has just happened. So in many ways, traumatic grief is almost like a two-pronged, it's two-pronged because both are happening simultaneously. And so one of the questions can be is, which one do you work with, or how do you work with both? Because both are happening simultaneously, which compounds the grief, because there's no space for there can be, I shouldn't speak in absolutes, excuse me. There can be no space for the grief, and the nervous system is stuck, and we're going to get to that slide, but is in such a state of shock that it can't allow for the grief, right? So you have almost both extremes happening simultaneously. And so one of the questions is how do you begin to loosen up one so that the other can be here, and how do you loosen up the other one so that the other can be here, because they're in relationship to one another. So that is just one of the questions that just that, in the trauma fields and the grief, in the grief literature, is how do we as a community begin to hold both? Are there any questions about that?
Excuse me, I don't see any questions, but people were just putting some more examples in there. And I think they speak to what you just said, because they kind of run the spectrum of anxiety, having heart palpitations, having a bad memory, feeling clumsy, just feeling overwhelmed. And then talking about how at first everything was really, difficult. I couldn't think about anything. And now I spend a lot of time in apathy and lethargy, sort of on that other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again. Hopefully this works. Oops. Oops. We're gonna start from the beginning. Oops. Okay. Okay. Oops. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna go into let me just move. Okay, defining trauma. Any unbearable emotional or somatic experience that overwhelms or threatens our capacity to feel safe. And you can see who said that at the end. Trauma can be defined as any unresolved autonomic nervous system. It's about the nervous system's response to an event, not necessarily the event itself. So, in all four of these quotes that I'm reading from are people who are experts in the trauma field. So, very well versed and researched and expertise in trauma. Traumatic events are extraordinary, not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations to life. And trauma is specifically an event that overwhelms the central nervous system, right? So, what we were just talking about, altering the way we process and recall memories. Trauma is not the story of something that happened back then. It's the current imprint of that pain, horror, and fear living inside of people. So, the reason I'm bringing these up is for a shared language and a way that we can move forward in the presentation when we're talking about trauma. Okay. All right. So this slide is an extension of the healthy nervous system. Excuse me, I'm just gonna grab my notes here. I just want to make sure I made some notes on mine. Okay, I'm glad I did. I must have known I had some extra notes here. Okay, so here we have symptoms of an undischarged traumatic stress. So when we're quote unquote normal, which who knows what normal is today, because this is very applicable actually to what's happening with the pandemic for a lot of us. So you add traumatic grief on top of this, and you can see that this was really applicable. So here in the gray line, you see what's considered quote unquote that normal flow. What happens when we experience a traumatic event, and that you can see that with the red line that moves outside of the dotted line, is that we get stuck. Okay, so this is really an important piece, is that we get stuck. We often get stuck in the stuck on position or the stuck off position. However, we can also vacillate between the two. So that's why they say, like, sometimes anxiety and depression are two sides of the same coin. It's like we can go from being anxious to being depressed. So let's just look in the upper right hand corner. So when we get into the stuck on position, anxiety, panic, hyperactivity, exaggerated startle, irritability to relax, restlessness, hypervigilance, digestive problems. Someone said stomach earlier, emotional flooding, chronic pain, sleeplessness, and hostility and rage. Okay. So when that's where you're stuck on, one of the questions is like, how do you begin to move the nervous system so that you're not in that stuck on position? The same is true for the stuck off position. So that again is the depression, the flat affects, the lethargy, feeling deadness, exhaustion, chronic fatigue, disorientation, disconnection, disassociation, complex syndromes, pain, low blood pressure, and poor digestion. So what's one of the things that I have found to be interesting about this, and we've learned a lot about the nervous system actually through watching animals, if you can believe it. And actually it makes sense because we're animals, mammals. What happens in the wild is that when an animal is under attack, and I don't mean to not oversimplify it or make light of it, because can actually be really helpful to understand what's happening to us in our biology. But when a animal gets attacked in the wild, and like there's an altercation, or I don't know what the technical term is, but a roughing around, the animal will shake off the stress of it. So you might even see that like with your dog, like if you have any animals, like a dog, they can like shake off when they get startled, or when they've been scolded or something of that nature. Okay. So they shake it off to return back to homeostasis, which means that they return back to what their original state was. So if we apply it to human beings, right? And when we get in the stuck on position, how are we digesting or discharging the stress from the traumatic experience? We're not. That is part of the problem and part of the added layers of the suffering, is that we have a traumatic experience. The physiological response is to excrete hormones, stress hormones, for us to act, right? So when a traumatic experience happens, we secrete hormones for us to act. But when we can't act, and when the traumatic event is inside of us, we're not discharging the hormones, which means they continue to circulate throughout the body. They continue to circulate throughout the body, which adds to the difficulty when we're in the traumatic state. Okay, so I'm just going to pause there because I know that was just a lot. Are there any questions about this?
Can you repeat just the last thing you said?
I'll try.
Okay.
Okay. So what happens is that I think this is it, is that when there's a traumatic event, there's the body's natural physiological response to secrete hormones for us to act. So an example would be like this, is that you're walking along like a sidewalk, like on a beautiful day, and all of a sudden you see like a child run into the street. Automatically you run and you go grab the child. You go, you grab the child, right? So the hormones have activated because you see something that you need to react to immediately. There's adrenaline that makes you not even look at the cars, you just go. But it has discharged in the system appropriately. This is actually exactly what's happening with the pandemic, is that there is all of this information, there's all this uncertainty, there's loneliness, which I'll speak about in a second, because I really think that this research is fascinating. And that is the adrenaline, the cortisol is being processed, but it's not being discharged. And so the high levels of cortisol and adrenaline are what's causing a lot of our health problems. And so that also, like, if you've got a lot of like adrenaline in your system, it can feel like panic, it can feel like anxiety,
Yes.
right? Yeah. Did that answer, was that what you were looking for?
Yes, thank you. It cleared it up.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions? Let me just check the chat.
Yeah, we did have a couple of comments in
Great.
the chat, Carly. One person commented that she felt like this is how her partner was maybe acting before he took his life, which I'm sure you can talk a little bit about. And then another comment about humans can also shake it off, run, dance, jump, howl, etc.
Yes. So absolutely. I hope I'm saying it right, and if I'm not, I apologize. Aeneas, yes. This is a natural. This is a natural human. I mean, there is some intelligence, right? And then I don't want to speak. I don't know the history of your partner, but often when there is distress, it runs on a continuum, right? When there is distress, we are often using physical activity to discharge. And actually, this is real. Okay, I'm just reading the chat. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And if I'm not addressing the question specifically to you, you're welcome to stay after. I just don't want to say something out of context that I don't have the correct information for. So, sorry, this is what I was going to say, is that right now in the past 20, 30 years, the amount of research on trauma is really just really coming into the foreground, a lot of studies. But what we're learning is we're taking what we've learned from indigenous cultures and we're actually applying it to healing trauma and discharging it. So I think someone said, Anika said, humans can also shake it off, run, dance, jump, and howl. And that's exactly what indigenous cultures do. So we're learning from them that is a way that they're more connected to the earth. They're more connected to their environment. Dance is often a part of the culture. And so we're learning that this is actually a way to discharge and return back to what's called a normal or a homeostasis. But this is the one thing, is that in our culture, right? We don't always like to shake it off, and we don't always like to move, because part of our culture has conditioned us to behave a certain way, to act a certain way, to keep it together, to keep, to not move our body, to not howl, when really there is deep healing in those practices. Yes, Alicia, body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk. He was the one. Yes, if anyone wants to read anything about trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, When the Body Keeps Score, highly recommended. Yes. So, okay, let me just check here. Any other questions before we move on? Oh, wait. Okay, yeah. I needed to see where I was. Any questions? Yes, Erica. Yes. Any questions anyone want to ask a question on the screen? Yeah. Okay. You're welcome. All right. Okay. You guys are like, some of you are like one step ahead of me. I can't get to my slides quick enough. All right, because this is a quote by Bessel van der Kolk, okay? So trauma in relationship to suicide grief. The essence of trauma is that it's overwhelming. I think there's another word where my screen is, unbelievable and unbearable. The Greek word for trauma is wound. And we have learned that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It's also an imprint left by the experience on the mind, brain, and body. So if you were curious about, I think what Alicia was saying, you might want to look at this book below. Okay. So moving towards our nervous system with a mindfulness perspective, right? So when our system is in a natural state, it's grounded, flexible, curious, connected, present, and able to regulate emotions. And when I say regulate, I don't mean being flat where you're perfectly peaceful, kind of like those like images that we saw earlier, but that there is a flow and a natural ebb and flow to the human experience. So this is I wanted to bring this up because if this is what's called the Autonomic Ladder, and this is from the work of Stephen Porges and Deb Dana. This is the polyvagal theory, and I am still working out. So not that the fight flight, which we learned about earlier, and this is in opposition to one another. They're saying many of the same things, but they have kind of, it's flipped. And the reason that I want to say this is because I actually like what I'm going to talk about last. And that's where on the top of it, you see the ventral vagal. And the ventral vagal is like a fancy word. There's actually a vagal nerve, but it's basically saying like when you're in that state of homeostasis or when you're grounded and flexible and at ease. But one way to think about this that I really appreciate is that you're moving up and down a ladder. So you can you can like apply both, right? So you're ebb and flow, but there's also this ladder. So when you're in the dorsal vagal, that's when you're immobilized, shut down, you feel collapsed. So that is in like the most primitive part of our brain, right? So if we think about, again, like being out in the wild and you have to hunker down, you have to camouflage, you have to withdraw, that is the sense of that is like the primitive part of our brain of survival. So some of us go straight to dorsal vagal when there is a traumatic event. It's naturally and biologically, physiologically appropriate and part of the natural response. And that's one of like the main things that I like want to hopefully get across today is that your experience wherever you are is a completely natural and appropriate response to trauma. And so whether you feel like you should be more in this way or more in that way, there's no rule book because your unique physiology, your life experiences, all the other things that you have play a part in the way that your nervous system is processing the trauma. So if there's maybe one like hope that at the end, at the end of this is that you can extend a little bit of kindness and compassion to your nervous system trying to survive and to continue to make sense of the loss, the confusion and the disorientation of it. So when we go to the dorsal vagal, that again, immobilized, shut down, collapsed. When there starts to become enough energy, right? So when the system starts to have enough energy, it climbs up the ladder into mobilized action taking, fight, flight. Okay. So that's what a lot of times what we consider hypervigilance or more anxious energy. But this is the thing, is that we often think of the sympathetic as being like, I don't want to be in the sympathetic because sympathetic is bad. That means that I'm anxious. That means that I'm like, on the up. But this is the thing. We need sympathetic activity. So in order for me to be here tonight, this is a lot of sympathetic energy, right? I'm mobilized. I'm always a little bit nervous presenting. Will they like it? Won't they like it? What are they thinking? I can't see everyone, right? So that is some of my sympathetic. So we need sympathetic. We need sympathetic to make decisions, quick decisions. We need sympathetic if we have to get to the hospital. We need sympathetic if we have a lot of work to do. So I don't want to like completely poo-poo the sympathetic nervous system because we actually need it. And so you can even think about your life right now in that there are certain things that your nervous system is doing that's actually really helping you. Even if it's in the stuck on position, it's actually just trying to help you survive. Okay. So one of the reasons I like the ladder is because the most highest evolutionary part of our nervous system is what's called the ventral vagal. And there's it's called the vagus nerve that runs like from this, like not the center, but through the eye, down through the chest, through the body. That's not important for right now. But the ventral vagal, when the ventral vagal is online, that's kind of when we like feel ourselves, right? And like the person's like holding up their arms and they're engaged and they're connected. What's interesting about the ventral vagal is that often the ventral vagal comes online through connection to other people, right? Through connection to other people. So when we talk about healing, and one of the things that the Loss program does so beautifully is that the groups are actually bringing the socially engaged and connection online, which is from a physiological perspective part of the healing and part of coming online with that higher evolution. And this is partly has come out of the pandemic, although the research that I read was prior to the pandemic, and that is what loneliness does to the nervous system and to the brain. So because we're all, and this is, I want to just acknowledge I'm going on a little diversion, but I hope that this is helpful information or at least interesting. And that is when we're alone. So when we're feeling lonely, when we're disconnected, when all we're doing is, seeing people on Zoom, we haven't maybe seen someone in person, and this was more, months ago, but it's still impacting us. The part of our brain that goes into fight flight is the same part of our brain when we are alone and we feel alone and not connected to others. So the reason this is the way it is because we are mammals and we are meant to belong and connect with a tribe. We are physiologically meant to be in connection with other human beings. So when you take that away, even if you're like an introvert like me, even when you take that away, it still highlights the part of the brain, deep in the brain, of the survival conditioning that something is wrong and I need to fight, flight, fix is a newer one, or freeze. Okay. Did anyone find that interesting? I just want to see if anyone found it interesting. Okay. I don't know if anyone did, but I hope that that was just helpful in considering too, just in terms of grief, right? Is that we often are, especially with traumatic grief, we're often doing it alone in some ways. So if that happens to be, you know, especially with families, because families experience it very differently. If you think of it just from a physiological or biological, I would definitely just think of it like connection is medicine. Connection is medicine. Okay. All right. Any questions up to this point? Let me just check. Are we going to 7 or 7:30?
We're good until 7:30, but
Okay.
it's up to you. You're in
Yeah, no.
control.
I just wanted to make sure I was either going to be like,
No, we gotta go. No. You're good. You're good.
I thought so, but I just wanted to. Okay. All right. Any questions about this before we move into our next? I'm just gonna, okay. Connection is medicine. Yeah. You know, and what's interesting, and this is kind of one of the things, this is one of the things that I just kind of percolate and contemplate a lot, right? Is that connection is medicine. And yet most of our wounding and hurts come from relationship and being in connection with other human beings. And it's the one thing that we need to heal. So that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Like the one thing that I need is actually the one thing that's hurt me the most in life. So it's a dilemma, right? I mean, it's a dilemma. So trusting yourself when you feel safe around people, to trust that those are good people to be around. And I think loss, I was not paid to say this, but I just think loss, I mean, they just draw those people, they draw good people. There are so many good people. All right. Connection may be positive depending upon who and the type of connection. How about the toxic types? Can you just say more about the toxic types? What, like, you mean like just in general, like what to do with toxic types? I'm just waiting for a response. Okay. Downward. Okay. So this is what I would say, right? And this is that when people, so I'm glad you brought this up here. Okay, this is the thing. It's not only our nervous system that we're in relationship with, but it's also other people's nervous system that we're in relationship with. Okay. So, one is that other people's nervous systems and other people's responses, not necessarily to the, I'm speaking a little bit more generally here. That is about them and not about you, right? So that is our responsibility to stay in our lane. And we get to make a choice. And I know, especially you know, for I'm speaking generally here and I'm making a blanket statement. However, you know, especially for women, we are conditioned in our culture to take everything on, right? And the invitation is to say, what is happening with that other person is not necessarily ours to take on. And you get to make a choice. You get to make a choice of, are you going to be in relationship with a toxic type of person or a downer type of person? And can you be okay with yourself, knowing that sometimes we have to disengage from relationships for our own health and well-being? And that's not from a selfish place. It's not from a place of being angry or mean. Sometimes we have to preserve our own mental and emotional health to heal in whatever capacity is. So, and sometimes that's a hard, like recommendation to take into consideration, because sometimes that means that it's the loss of a relationship, right? Or the loss of the idea of the relationship, especially if it's family of origin, right? Especially if it's those relationships that you're supposed to have a relationship with your sister. You're supposed to have a relationship with your brother or your mom. I mean, the closest. And sometimes we have to make that distinction that they are having their own life experience that doesn't actually have to do with us. And I think that we're really good and at taking everything on as either our fault, our problem, ours to be solved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Pierre, was that helpful in answering your question? Okay, I'm just going through the chat. So, okay. Yes, Pierre, it's like shedding excess baggage. And I will say something else about that. And Patty, I see your message and I'm going to get to it in 1 second. Okay. Is that when we do shed baggage, or when we do low contact or no contact, when we distance ourselves from relationships, it can feel as if, number one, we're betraying. It can feel like the loss of the relationship is actually anxiety producing, even though it's toxic, even though we know mentally that it's not helpful. And this is interesting too about nervous systems, is that our nervous system is responding to the separation, and our nervous system is conditioned within relationship to nervous systems. So I'm conditioned a certain way by my family of origin because of the type of family I grew up in. I grew up in a big family and lots of chaos and all that sort of stuff. So my nervous system is conditioned that way. So when I don't have it, I feel like something is missing or something's wrong, even though it could potentially be really unhealthy for me. I have chosen unhealthy over healthy because of what is familiar. And so there's a process in letting go. And it's not easy in the context of grief, when you need people and you need the people who are family, that can often go in many different directions around a loss, like suicide. So I'll just end there. And then I know that anger from others is very difficult. Okay, so anger is not about you, it's about the person discharging what they cannot internalize or have the capacity for. And so that is where you can, put up you are allowed to put up a boundary that can protect you. And that just because it's, and I don't know exactly, Patty, but like, just because, if it's a family member, a partner, a spouse, a child, just because they're in a close circle does not give them permission to lash out. And one of my new favorite words, wait, hold on, let me see if I can remember it because I'm just learning it. Hold on, let me unbridled self-expression. Unbridled self-expression. It doesn't give people the right. Just like Patty, I'm not picking on you, I'm just saying is that just like Patty, you also don't have the right to have unbridled self-expression towards others, right? Or me, or whoever. I'm looking at Emily, right? But like, so it's, you have permission to say that it is overstepping a boundary, and you don't have to engage, and it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a healthy person. And most importantly, it makes you a compassionate and kind person for yourself. It makes you a kind and compassionate person for yourself. Anika, I really appreciate you being there because I keep seeing you nod. So it's like, I know I've got someone there. And this is who was in my screen, and Kathleen and Emily and Debbie. So, okay.
Well, and Annika had also commented earlier, it's probably too far up, but she had just talked about how difficult it is to trust other people. And I know you sort of said that too, even 11 years out from her mother's suicide, that it's hard to trust others.
It is hard. You're right. Yeah, it is. And your body also will, your body will tell you too. And, you know, I mean, this is it's like, I'm just trying not to speak too quickly. It takes time to heal, to trust others. Yeah, and sometimes we just need time. Even after 11 years, it just takes time. And that your body knows when there's good people around too.
Well, and that, Carly, another message that I got, you might not have seen, is kind of the flip side of what you're talking about. It says, sometimes the strongest support comes from the least expected person, someone who is outside of our family. The showing of compassion by others can be so therapeutic. It can make us, make me or us cry, even if the compassion was expressed for something outside of our loss.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is where, you know, this is where it becomes difficult for us who have had any family trauma, and not just suicide loss, but and that is, we have the idea of what family is, right? We have the picture. I used to have the picture because I come from a big family. It was of the Brady Bunch. And I can tell you that I did not grow up in the Brady Bunch. And I was like looking for like Mike and Carol all the time, you know? And I don't mean to be like flippant around about it, but like, I had to learn that my family often were the people who were outside of my family, who really saw me, who really knew me, who went out of their way for me, and that there's a grief to that, you know. And I remember, I know this has happened a lot, so, but in the 8-week group, I remember a couple who had lost, you know, their son, and the least support was from their family, right? And the disappointment around that, right, is like, but this is who I thought was really supposed to show up for me. And that's why and this goes back to like one of the first slides, is that where do we turn our attention to, right? Do we turn our attention to the person who just showed up for us in the most unexpected way? Do we turn our attention to that person? Or do we turn our attention to what we don't have and who didn't show up for us? And that's a choice that we all get to make. And all of us are making it on some level every day. We're all making it. Yeah. So does,
There's
so,
a, oh,
go ahead.
sorry. There was a question that came through, which I love the way it's worded. I think it's very honest. How do I get back on the ladder? I don't want to do this, but I need to get the job done.
Okay. How do you get back on the ladder? So one, you just notice that the first, like, so, right. It's like, you notice that there's a ladder and that you're off the ladder. Like, right. Like, I mean, this is the whole thing, is that when we're in like a trauma state, right, we're just like, we're pedaling in the same, like, we're just pedaling or walking in motion, right? Like Groundhog's Day or something, it's like same. So just noticing, one, that there's a ladder. Two, where are you in the ladder, right? Where am I in the ladder? So am I totally shut down? Or am I like mobilized and in fight, flight, freeze, or fight, flight, freeze, fix? And usually if you're in the ventral or in like the top of the ladder, you're on top of the ladder. So you don't need to get back on, and you don't want to go, you're probably not going to go back down. So this is where, let me see where I am, because, okay. So let me hopefully see where I'm just trying to think if there's a slide that shows this. No, it's not. Okay. So I'll just move to this slide. Let me pause and see how to answer this, because this is it's a really good question. Okay, I'm gonna take myself off share screen. Oops. Oh, I'm giving my away. Okay, what time is it? Okay. Let me just stop the screen share for a second. So, and this is where like mindfulness, we all have different ways to get back into ventral vagal or back on the ladder, in the top of the ladder. So for some people, it might mean like, I'm just going to cook a good meal, right? I'm just going to take my time and cook a good meal. For other people, it might mean I'm going to pick up the phone. So mindfulness is noticing about what's happening and making a choice that is in supportive of your inner life or your inner world, or your spirit for that matter. It might mean like looking up in the sky. I'm a big sky person, right? So it's what little things bring you back to center. And it doesn't matter if it's like skipping or playing hopscotch in your house. It doesn't matter if it's brushing your teeth. It doesn't matter what it is. And no one needs to know about it, and no one needs to give you permission. It's just finding delight in the small things. And so the next time you are in, like, when you're feeling like clear, when you're feeling, even if it's just like a moment of just like a drop of gratitude or a drop of joy, just note what brings you back to center. What brings you back to yourself? It might mean organizing. It might mean, cleaning. There are so many things in part of our day to day that actually bring us back to center. But then when we put the word mindfulness on there, we think that we have to be sitting down doing this extensive breathing practice and, doing all these, like, I come from a yoga background, so like yoga practices and all that. And yeah, if that brings you joy, yes, do it, go for it. But if just cuddling up on the couch and having a blanket over you and just a cup of tea by you, if that's what brings you back to center, then that's what brings you back to center. And I'm glad you brought this up, because I don't know where this was in my presentation, but we can often think and often expect, if I'm in the lower part of like that dorsal vagal, kind of lethargic, depressed, we can think, I'm not feeling good, I don't want to move, therefore I should go out and run a marathon. I'm going to start training for a marathon in the middle of January. It's freezing cold, why not? Like, that's the opposite. And there is backlash to that, because the body is in this stuck off position, and the body needs to move slowly out of that position. So Peter Levine, if any of you, he's a trauma expert, he talks about titration. So just like a very small amount. So that might literally mean, you know what, I'm going to just walk up the stairs a couple of times, or I'm going to get up and get a cup of coffee or a tea or something, right? So when we think of getting back on the ladder, it doesn't mean that we have to do the exact opposite. The same is true if we're in that fight flight. And that means like, oh, just because I'm super anxious and hypervigilant and panicky, I am just going to sit down and meditate for 50 minutes and breathe and be completely calm. There will be backlash, right? Your system is going to be like, what are you doing to me? Get me out of here. And you'll never want to come back to yourself. So it's like, if you can just say like, okay, I'm going to just give myself just like 30 seconds just to pause and resource like we did at the beginning. Okay, I can see that there's a picture of a blue sky ocean in front of me. Okay, I'm here. Titrate, just a little drops. Let go of the big swings, like you've got to like get it all mastered, because it doesn't work. Sorry, I wish I could tell you it worked, but it doesn't. Yes, Maria said baby steps, one choice at a time. Yeah. The other thing, and this was actually, I remember last year when I did the facilitator meeting, I remember a couple had said that this was super helpful. This is also really, really helpful to remember about this titration in relationship to other people, especially other people who are grieving, okay, or who might be depressed or might be anxious. We can see this so for example, I'll just give like a personal example. So I have a teenage son, and it was in the pandemic, and he was just having a hard time. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's got to like get up and he's got to start moving and running. And like, you know, like everything that I'm telling you not to do, I was like in my mind saying like, oh my gosh, he's just got to like, get, you know, like da, 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 da. And I remember I was like, no, I'm like, this is actually the opposite. He doesn't need to be doing this. He just needs to do a baby step, just like what I think it was Maria. Yeah, just a baby step. Little things, what connect him to himself. So it's not only that we have to apply this to ourselves, but also to those people who are suffering and to those people who are going through loss or trauma. And then the other thing is the same for anxiety, right? It's like, we just want that like quick fix. And I will be honest with you, when I saw my son who was like, I couldn't fix it, I was like, oh, I was uncomfortable with his discomfort because I didn't want him to suffer. And I'm gonna imagine all of us are in the same boat in some way, that it's uncomfortable when someone we love is suffering and we can't do anything about. And we have to remember they can't always do the extreme to get out of that place. Just like for us, just like for them. So if we can extend that same generosity to them, I think that it helps to restore the relationship, or to not to restore it, but to honor the relationship. So Anika, practical suggestions for intrusive images. You know, I just want to be, I'll be happy to stay afterwards. And I know that this is common, but I just, to make a blanket statement, I just want to be sensitive to that. But I will say this, and where did I'm just trying to think. Oh, I learned something. I mean, I'm kind of always learning and reading and following up, but I did learn something that I thought was really interesting from EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And that is that flashbacks, nightmares, that is the body's response to being under stress. And this might have seemed like just the way that I heard it seemed to make a lot of sense, that the body is still processing, even if it's, months or years afterwards. So, and that's just like kind of my quick answer, but there's one thing is there are different, I think that there are different ways, but if you want to stay on later, you can. Okay. All right. Okay. So where am I? Anyone have any other questions before I move on? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Uh-oh. Okay. So I want to read this quote. And this is very interesting. Oh, okay. Can you see me? Or can you just see the screen?
We can only see you.
Okay. And can you hear me? And can you see the screen?
Yes. We cannot see your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I'm glad I asked. Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to go through. Oh my goodness. Can you see the PowerPoint now? Anyone? Can you see?
Not yet.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Hold on one sec. Hold on. Why can't? Oh, I know why. Oh. Okay. I see. I was getting too confident, and then I. Okay. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. So can you see me now?
We can see your screen.
All right. Okay. All right. I'll put it up in a second. So, I am like, don't know what I'm doing right now. Okay. So I was sick last week, and I was putting together the PowerPoint. I was just like slides, and I was updating information. But when you're sick and you just don't your energy is low, you're just kind of like, okay. And so that's how I was feeling. But and so I got to my slide, and I got to this. Well, an email popped up, and I opened the email, and I read the email, and I was right at this decision, this like critical decision for the presentation. And so I read I read this quote that I'm going to share with you, and I was like, all right. So I said, I'm just going to see how this feels. It'll make sense when I tell you this in a minute, or when I show you this in a moment. So this was the quote. Okay, hold on. I am so sorry about my poor, okay. So this is the quote. Here we go. So I know you all can read, but I don't know if everyone's on camera, or maybe they're doing something else. So I sometimes forget that I was created for joy. My mind is too busy. My heart's too heavy for me to remember that I have been called to dance the sacred dance of life. I was created to smile, to love, to be lifted up, and to lift others up. O sacred one, untangle my feet from all that ensnares. Free my soul that we might dance, and that our dancing might be contagious. So I read this quote, and then I was like, I'm just going to play this clip. I'm going to see what it does for me. And after I played the clip, I was like, okay, I'm going to play it again tonight. So this is the clip. And for those of you who were here last time, so that you don't have to get up and dance, but I will promise you, I will imagine that your toes, even if you don't get up and dance, your toes or your fingers might dance a little bit. So I just want you to just have a few minutes, or not a few, yeah, it's just like a couple minutes. All right, hold on. Can you all see this? Okay.
If you're going to go see one movie, see the one critics are calling laugh out loud hilarious and easily.
Carly, if you want us to see what's on your screen, I think you'll have to switch the share over to a different screen.
Wait, what do I do?
So if you hit the like your share screen options,
Mhm.
you'll have
Oh,
to-
right.
yeah.
Okay. All right, hold on. You're so good, Emily.
Oh, you're much better than you give yourself credit for.
Okay. Thank you, Emily, for that. Okay. All right. Hold on. Here we go. Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, playing might be. Debbie was our star
With Master's Customer Journey
dancer.
Builder, you can connect with more
I was
customers.
dancing with my dog.
Friends to the path to purchase.
All right, hold on. Okay, there we go. So I know that not everyone loves to dance, and I know, and we have different tastes of music, but the essence of that was to demonstrate that moving the body and simple pleasures can just start to open us up, just a little bit. And so I just wanted to end on that note that, even in the midst of, so much suffering and hardship and difficulty, that there are still little sparkles of joy that I wish for all of you. So that concludes the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to stay on. I don't have to be anywhere. So if anyone has any questions, you can if you want to reach out to me. Debbie, do you want me to give my contact information, or do you just want them to reach out to you if anyone wants? Or
what's your preference?
Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can reach out directly to me if you it's fine. It's fine.
You'd have to give them your email address.
Here, I'll just put it in the chat, and then you can just go, let's see. Okay. All right. Yes, dance like no one is watching. Okay. Yeah, so there we have it. So it was great conversation. I really enjoy, I love the questions, because then they are a reflection of the group. So I hope that it was helpful. I hope that there's just maybe one thing you learned. And like I said, it's really good to see old friends, and I hope to make new friends. And so
Great job, Carly.
Yes, thank you so much, Carly. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that if anybody does want to stick around, if you've got questions for Carly, please feel free. But this is the end of our official presentation. So thank you all for coming. We hope you'll join us next month.